a quorum, though, I believe. So why don't we call the meeting to order and move through some of the initial stages while we wait to see if other folks are going to join us. So the first item on the agenda is agenda review and approval. Are there any? So the agenda was sent out in an email on Friday of last week, I believe. Are there any questions or proposed amendments to the agenda?
Move the agenda as presented.
Second.
Right, motion and second to adopt the agenda. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? All right, we have adopted the agenda. So the next item is minutes from the meeting on January 18th. Are there any proposed edits?
Move approval as presented.
Second.
All right, there's a motion for adoption and approval of minutes from January 18th. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? All right, we have adoption and approval of the January 18th minutes. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Elsa, do you know if there's anyone who's registered for public comment?
We do. We have one person who registered online, and we probably have some other people attending. So we have registered Katie Schultz from Win-Win Action Network. I believe there she is. Yes.
Great. And I don't
Hello,
know.
welcome.
Hello. I'm not sure if you can see me or I'm on video, but
We can't see you.
okay. It's okay. I'll just do audio if that works.
Great.
Oh.
Go ahead, Katie.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Oh, there she is.
Hi.
We can see you now.
Okay, great. I had to join as a panelist, so we're working through it. Well, I can go ahead and get started if that's helpful.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Stoltz. I use she, her pronouns. It's good to see the new Seattle Redistricting Commission. I'm so excited to see all of you here today. I'm joining today as a resident in District 5 in the Lake City neighborhood and a lifelong King County resident. I'm also joining as a member of the statewide Redistricting Justice for Washington Coalition, which is a coalition, statewide coalition of over 25 organizations that has been working over the past 2 years to call for an open, transparent, and community-engaged redistricting process, primarily in the statewide process. As many of our organizations have moved efforts really to the local process, we wanted to join here today to be able to provide some of our hopes for public engagement and community engagement in the Seattle process. We are also very excited and hopeful to see and hear about the commitments that the Seattle Redistricting Commission has already made and plans to make in including communities in the process. Specifically, we put together a letter that outlines some of the best methods for increasing community accountability and feedback in the process that we've learned over the last year. We sent it over this morning. I will just touch on a few of the high-level points, but if you have any questions, we'll make sure that we're available and would love to share in more detail about some of those points. Specifically, this is the first opportunity that Seattle residents will have to engage in drawing of the new districts since the voters approved the districts in 2013. So we're hopeful that we can really set a precedent for how this process looks for the future. A couple of things we want to touch on while you're really building the process are really just ensuring that the public hearing schedule has a diversity of meeting times and days of the week, and that there's at least 4 weeks after map proposals have been shared to provide input. And then the second last thing I'll provide is just making sure that the commission website is developed in such a way that has accessible community education toolkits and information for folks to take back. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we did receive the written comments, so that's very helpful.
Thank you.
Well, Elsa, do you know if there's anyone else signed up for public comment?
We don't have anybody else signed up, and I don't see, and Logan, can you check one more time before? We haven't received anything in the last hour, right?
I believe Nere signed up. Nere Petty.
Oh, Nire. Is Nire on the call?
Yes.
Oh, there she is.
There we go.
Hi.
So welcome.
I can't hear anybody. Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
We heard you for a minute there.
It looks like you're muted now, Ray.
Hello, everyone. I've joined. Apologies for the delay. I was having a tech meltdown, so it's good to see everyone.
Welcome.
You're here. You're here. Trying to figure out some technical. Nire, can you hear us? Let's see if we can.
Shall we come back?
I think we should come back. I think they might be reconnecting, or can you unmute, Logan? Can you, let's see. If I can.
Yeah, I asked to unmute, so it might be a technical issue.
Got it. There it
Hi,
is.
everyone. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
About it. Perfect. All right. My apologies. Should I just start and go ahead? I just had a few questions for the commission.
Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Nari Petty. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Advocacy Program Manager with the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. I want to thank you all for being here. This seems like a great commission. I'm really excited for this year. I do have some questions, however, about how the GIS consultant drafts the initial map. This is a new process for me. And I'd just like to know if there is any community involvement with the initial draft map and how that goes.
So yeah, I mean, I guess maybe we can take some time just to discuss that briefly. So our initial, so the consultant is providing 4 initial maps, one map that will be very similar to the existing map, one map that would be the most compact districts that could be made based on the computer's parameters, and then 2 intermediate maps. These maps are all preliminary maps and will be soliciting community feedback over the subsequent months before suggesting final maps. Yeah, and I know that there's been some discussion among the commission about whether to create a process or the possibility of having a process that has input prior to the release of the initial set of maps. But the way our schedule works, there's a requirement that we have an initial set of maps drafted pretty early in the process. But we expect those maps to be significantly altered based on community input. Did you have follow-up questions or other items?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Elsa, did you have, is there anyone else who's signed up for public comment?
I don't have anybody on the list.
And so if there is anybody else on the line who has public comment, you can raise your hand using the raise hand function in Zoom. Looks like the recording was, oh, okay, there we go. All right, so I think that next item on the agenda was the legal presentation from Ms. Schneier. Is that right, Elsa?
Yes, let's do it.
All right.
Something I'm sure you've been on bated breath for is legal training. So it looks like I don't have permissions to share a screen. Is that right? I think I don't. I'm joined as a panelist. I don't think I have hosting abilities to share my screen. Maybe Elsa or Logan, if one of you could pull up the slide deck that I sent out, or else maybe we can change my permissions so that I can pull it up.
You should be able to. So if you're a panelist, you should be able to. Do you find the share screen? No. Logan, can you help us with that?
Sure, yeah. I think I have you as a co-host, but I could change it to host and see if that helps.
So stereotypical lawyer here, I'm not the most tech savvy. So if there's a button or a menu thing that I should be looking at to get that share screen function, let me know, because I think right now I just have everyone's faces.
Yeah, I can always share my screen, and I have your presentation up. If that works. You can just say
Okay.
next slide, and
Yeah, be great, Logan. Thanks. Yeah. Otherwise, I can do it, but it might take longer to just get me to figure this thing out. So, thanks. And we can just go to the slideshow view. That might be the best way to do it. Great. So, hi, everybody. I'm Ariel Schneier, Assistant City Attorney with the Seattle City Attorney's Office. And today I'd like to provide basically a comprehensive legal background so that you can have an understanding of the legal landscape as you're going into making your districting decisions. So it's an overview rather than a specific set of instructions for you. It's really just to get you a general understanding. Some of these issues that we talk about, you may encounter with your districting process, and some of them you may not. But again, these are the legal concepts for you to keep in mind. That said, there's still going to be a lot in this presentation, even if it's at a high level. There's just a lot to get through in the subject matter. So sorry, I'm a lawyer. I tried to cut through the legalese as much as I could, but there's still going to be some content. So let's get started. So let's start at the beginning. What is redistricting? Over time, the city's population grows, and maybe it shrinks in some areas and it grows in others. It might grow at different rates. Some neighborhoods might blow up and be like South Lake Union and get high rises every 3 days. Some might not. So what happens is that over time, even though these districts were originally drawn so that each district would have an equal share of the electorate, over time, the districts get more or less populated, and all of a sudden those districts become out of balance. So every 10 years after the sentence, we rebalance them by redrawing the district lines to adjust for those new population numbers. Next slide. So there are 3 different levels of law governing our redistricting process. There's the federal law, so there's provisions like the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause, the 15th Amendment, the Voting Rights Act. At the state level, there's RCW 29A 76010 sub 4, which applies to local districts. Such as municipalities like Seattle. And then there's local law. There's our city charter. So each have their own provisions and they're each written in their own way. Some state the same criteria more stringently than others. For example, you can look here at the bottom where the criteria kind of overlaps. At federal law, the standard for local districts is that the populations must be substantially equal. At state law, it gets a lot tighter. It says it needs to be nearly equal in population as possible. And then at the local level, the Seattle City Charter goes even further, and it states that the population deviation shall be no more than 1%. So you can see how there's that interplay. Sometimes different laws use different language to mean the same thing. So, for example, when it comes to talking about gerrymandering, the RCW might say may not take data into consideration to grant favor for one group over another. But really what that is the definition of gerrymandering. So if we go to the next slide, taken together, you can synthesize all those laws and we come up with the following concepts. These are the basic rules for you to guide you as you go forward about what these districts need to have and what they can't have. So from the top, district populations must be as equal as possible with 1% difference between the smallest and largest district at the most. Districts must be as compact as possible. They must be contiguous. The boundaries must not be drawn based on the residence of any individual. They must not be gerrymandered. And then to the extent practical, district boundaries shall do the following. They must follow existing district boundaries, follow recognized waterways and geographic natural boundaries, and preserve or follow existing communities of interest in neighborhoods. And I'm going to spend the rest of this presentation talking about each of these concepts in turn. So let's slide. So let's talk about equal population. This directive for equal population stems from the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. When we say it's based on the entire population, we're counting everyone in that district, not just the people who are eligible to vote. So seniors, babies, not dogs and cats, but people regardless of their citizenship status. Everyone gets counted. Potentially, and this is something that I'm going to keep track of as we go forward, potentially this will include prisoners who are currently incarcerated elsewhere, but whose last known address was within the city limits. This is currently being proposed as a bill at the state legislative level, so we'll track as it follows through. Right now, we don't have that factor to consider, but we might, depending on whether or not it gets passed. So the one thing I want to say about equal population, the real sticking point with this is that this is non-negotiable. This is not one factor to be considered and balanced against other factors. The districts have to be as equal as possible with no more than 1% of a deviation. All the other factors are in relation to this criteria. Okay, next slide. So districts must be compact. And what do we mean by that? It means having as small a distance as possible between all parts of the constituency. And the Washington courts have defined it as regular in shape as possible, instead of meaning compact as in as small as possible. There was a case where the plaintiff was trying to argue that districts being compact meant that it needed to be small. That's not the case. They need to be as regular as possible. So think of a circle, think of a square or a hexagon where it's really kind of evenly distributed around a center point. The picture at right is an infamous example of a district that is not compact. It's pretty loosey-goosey. It is very gerrymandered, and this is what gerrymandering can look like. And that's why compactness is a crucial factor. It's a good telltale sign of whether something district is gerrymandered or not. One thing to note in Washington is that the standard isn't that technical. So the Washington State Supreme Court has said basically they'll consider a district to be compact as long as it's not grotesque, absurd, tortured, or a strangely elongated shape. So next slide. The next criteria is that districts must be contiguous. And what that means is that it must be one whole. It must be an uninterrupted shape. You must be able to travel or walk from one part of the district through another without crossing through another district. So yeah, so no little dangling pieces. If you're going to redistrict District 1, which is in the South End, for example, you can't have a piece of the district up in Lake City. So next slide. So this is spelled out in the Seattle Charter. Neither the commission or the districting consultant may consider the residence of any one individual, any one person in drawing the map. So here's an example of some potential districting in West Seattle. Commissioner Nichols, I was thinking of you. So you can't draw a line just so that you can include Eddie Vedder in your district or exclude Eddie Vedder from your district. So that might come into play when it comes to various politicians and considering their residences. I'll talk about that in a bit. Next slide. So let's talk about the big issue, which is gerrymandering. What is gerrymandering? It's drawing a map to give one group an advantage over another to boost your chances of electing the candidate of your choice. And when I'm saying you, I'm talking about the commission, the people who are in charge of drawing the map. So you do this by diluting the other group's voting power. They have less of a chance of electing the candidate of their choice. We talk a lot about partisan and political gerrymandering, but it can really mean gerrymandering against any group. So in Northern Ireland, for example, there's gerrymandering for Protestants and Catholics. It could be gerrymandering for incumbents, the people who voted for a particular incumbent. It could be potentially gerrymandering based on age. It could be really any demographic, although in this country, the two main categories for gerrymandering have historically been partisan or political gerrymandering and gerrymandering based on race. So how do you gerrymander? You draw district boundaries that, when viewed as a whole, aren't proportionate to the demographic makeup of the electorate. So there's a couple of techniques that we'll go into. The two big ones are packing and cracking. So the effect is that when you're diluting the voter strength of a certain group, those voters don't have as much of a chance of electing their candidates. Next slide. So here's what we mean. And this slide might be hard to see. I apologize. I'll try to walk you through it. Let's take a look. So if you're looking at the image on the left, let's pretend this rectangle is a city. And in this city, there's 60% orange and 40% purple. So for the districts to be proportionate, 60% of the districts should be majority orange and 40% of the districts should be majority purple. If you look in the center, there's a couple of different fair ways to draw these districts where they get that, ultimately you get that voting power reflected, where it's 40% of the voting power goes to purple, 60% of the voting power goes to orange. The not fair version is if you draw the lines so that the purple is always in the minority, no matter the district, so they never really get to capture the voting power of any one district. Or if you draw the lines in such a way that the voting power is really just condensed into one district, so that they're not able to influence other districts to the degree that they normally would be if you were just going on their numerical power. So next slide, we can talk about this a little bit, break this down into two things. This is cracking is the first one, splitting a group's members across multiple districts to ensure that the opposing party doesn't have a majority in any district. So in this example, you have 60% blue 60% gray wards, a majority gray, and 40% blue. If you just draw these in the center, these nice, compact, even looking districts, they look great, but what happens? The blue, the power of the blue vote is diluted across 3 different districts. So even though the blue makes up 40% of the electorate, they only, all 3 districts are going to be having the voting power for go to the gray majority rather than the blue. On the other hand, if you redraw the lines, you could end up with districts that where one of the districts is blue, and then it would be in proportion with the electorate. If 40% of the population at large is blue, then it makes sense that if you're having 3 different districts, one of those districts be blue and 2 would be gray. So next slide is the inverse, which is pecking. And that is, instead of dividing the minority groups, a group that is numerically in the minority, instead of dividing their members across districts, it's cramming them into one district, so that they're wasting their voting power just in one district that they probably would have won anyway, and reducing their voting power in other districts. So again, here you have 60% blue and 40% gray. So now gray is in the minority. The center tile shows what happens when blue wards are packed together. So even though they're in the minority, if you look at the districts, there's only one, even though blue is numerically in the majority of the electorate, if you look at the slides, the way that they've all been packed into one district, it means that they only are in the majority in one district, whereas the 2 other districts are majority gray, and so it's out of proportion with the electorate. If you look at the right, you get a proportional outcome where you have 2 districts are majority blue, 1 district majority gray, and that's reflective of the general electorate. So let's take another look at packing, because packing can basically be seen as affirmative gerrymandering. So let's go to the next slide. Sometimes gerrymandered groups prefer packed districts, or they agree to packed districts. And you'll find those in what we call majority minority districts. They can be political majority minority, they could be racial majority minority, or incumbent gerrymandering. Why would a minority ever agree to packing a district? Well, it can guarantee a seat. And so if their numbers aren't very strong, it might be something that they think, oh, at least we have this representation. So by the way, I want to take a pause. I'm starting to refer to the term minority in this training, and I just want to take a moment. Sometimes that will mean racial minority, and I recognize that this term is disfavored, but in this training, I'm covering the law and the state of the law, and the law employs the term because it's identifying a group that is a minority in the electorate based on their racial makeup. So I just want a little caveat. It's not using the term minority flippantly, it's trying to use it technically. So back to affirmative gerrymandering. Despite the fact that certain groups might prefer, certain minority groups might prefer affirmative gerrymandering, and despite the fact that it might be legal elsewhere in other jurisdictions, depending on their state and local laws, the Seattle City Charter is very clear: no gerrymandering. So no gerrymandering to benefit a minority, and no gerrymandering to hurt a minority. Let's go to the next slide. Other gerrymandering techniques. These can be fun little terms. There's kidnapping. So redrawing a district to exclude a resident, an incumbent from her own district. So basically kicking an incumbent politician out of her own district. There's also hijacking. So where you redraw a line so that 2 incumbents would have to run against each other and one of them has to get knocked out. So those are other less frequently used gerrymandering techniques, but they pop up now and again, and it's something to be aware of. Okay, next slide. Let's get into the Voting Rights Act. And this is where things get a little bit denser. Again, this is to give you an overview, and these are some subtle legal considerations. So if it's tricky, I'm always here to answer questions and help clarify. We talked about gerrymandering, but the Voting Rights Act overlays that concept. In a nutshell, redistricting that dilutes the voting power of a minority, racial, or linguistic group is unlawful, regardless of whether or not the favoring or the discrimination was intentional. So when we were talking about gerrymandering, we were talking about drawing lines to give a group an advantage over another group. Here, it doesn't matter whether it was to give a group an advantage or not. The intent might have just been to keep the districts compact or to provide for equal population. But if in doing so, it dilutes the voting power of a minority, racial, or linguistic group, and those are the two groups that the Voting Rights Act covers, you may be required to redraw the map to preserve their voting power. So as I just mentioned, the Voting Rights Act, it doesn't apply to everyone. It just applies to racial or linguistic minority groups. So other classes, including other classes that might be protected in other areas of the Constitution, like age, religion, LGBTQIA status, those are not covered by the Voting Rights Act. So we're really just looking at these two types of minority groups. So the Voting Rights Act, a little history, it was designed to combat the practice of denying voters of color the right to a vote. And so it's basically the enforcement mechanism for the 15th Amendment's guarantee that the right to vote shall not be abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So what we're talking about when we're talking about the Voting Rights Act, when it comes to redistricting, is Section 2. Which states that no voting qualification or prerequisite to voting or standard or practice or procedure shall be imposed or applied by any state or political subdivision in a manner which results, again, that's that word results, in a denial or abridgment of the right of any citizen of the United States to vote on account of race or color. So citizen of the United States, one thing to call out is when we're talking about, if we're measuring the dissolution of voting power, we're talking here about, we're counting members of a voting group that are eligible to vote. I know I talked about earlier how when we're divvying up the districts in order for equal population that we're counting everyone. Here, we're just talking about those minority group voters who are entitled to vote, who are eligible to vote. So how do we measure what's a discriminatory result? Well, a court will look at the totality of the circumstances. So the measure is whether the redrawn district has curtailed or abridged or shrunk or diluted the protected voters' ability to participate equally in elections and to elect the representatives of their choice. So it doesn't hinge on whether a district is a minority district or not. It's whether it's diluting the minority group's ability to elect the candidates of their choice. One thing to note is the Voting Rights Act overrides inconsistent state and local laws. So you might be thinking, hey, didn't we just talk about how Seattle doesn't allow gerrymandering? Well, the Voting Rights Act preempts that. So when it comes to preserving the voting power of racial and linguistic minority groups, the Voting Rights Act reigns supreme. Let's go to the next slide. Another consideration is whether you're allowed to consider race in drawing your voting districts, because doing so under normal circumstances violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which states, so under the 14th Amendment, a state in absence of sufficient justification may not separate its citizens into different voting districts on the basis of race. So how do we square the Voting Rights Act with this prohibition on districting by race? Well, for the legally trained among us, this triggers something called strict scrutiny. I'm not going to get into that, but basically, the commission, race may be a predominant factor if the map drawers can prove that sorting voters by race serves a compelling interest and is narrowly tailored to that end. So the courts have found that complying with the Voting Rights Act is considered a compelling interest. So if taken as a whole, the commission may consider a race if doing so is necessary to comply with the Voting Rights Act. Let's go to the next slide, though. Is a particular map, let me back up. Is the district triggering the Voting Rights Act in the first place? If you're going to complain that you need, if you're going to claim that you need to be able to draw a district based on race to comply with the Voting Rights Act, first you have to show that the Voting Rights Act applies to you, applies to the map, applies to your district. So to determine that, let's look at the 3 conditions under which someone can make a claim under the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act for vote dissolution. So this is called the Gingles Test. The first criteria, number 1, a minority group must be sufficiently large and geographically compact to constitute a majority in some reasonably configured legislative district. So that means they have the numbers to be able to form their own to be able to form a majority in a district based off of the numbers that you're using to draw equal population districts. Number 2, the minority group must be politically cohesive. So they need to be shown that they more or less vote as a block. They tend to vote as a block. So if you have a minority group or a linguistic minority group that, you know, half of them vote Democrat and half of them vote Republican, you're not going to satisfy that second criteria. There really needs to be a track record of showing that this particular racial or linguistic minority group votes consistently for the same party or the same type of candidate. The third criteria, and this one's interesting, a district's white majority, or in sometimes just a district's racial majority, must vote sufficiently as a block to defeat the minority's preferred candidates. So what this means is, again, the standard is the voting dissolution is prohibited if it interferes with or abridges the minority group's ability to elect candidates of their choice. If they are in a district where half of the majority population is going to be voting for the candidates they favor anyway, their vote, they're not really going to be suffering an infringement of their ability to elect their candidates. Their candidates are going to get voted in regardless of whether they're in the minority or not. That can be called a coalition district. So taken together, what does this mean? If any one of these factors isn't met, for example, factor 3 isn't met, and you have a minority group that's had its numbers reduced in its district, or its proportion of members reduced in its district, but the majority group is going to be has enough members to vote for that candidate anyway, so that the candidate would be likely to succeed. Then the commission is going to lack the required compelling interest to justify drawing a district based on race. So let's put a pin in the Voting Rights Act and now just discuss briefly the other district criteria. Next slide. So this goes back to the requirements at the state level and as well as the city charter. So the districts, to the extent practical or feasible, must follow existing district boundaries. They must follow recognized waterways and natural boundaries. In the city of Seattle, those are plentiful. They must preserve, to the extent possible or feasible, preserve or follow existing communities of interest in neighborhoods. What do we mean by when we say to the extent practical or feasible? So these are the criteria that are subordinate to all the other criteria. So maintaining compact districts, equal proportion districts, equal population districts, and districts that aren't gerrymandered are going to be more important than these criteria, but to the extent that you're able to employ these criteria, you need to do so. And I think that's it. So let's go to the next slide just for a bit of a summary. So in short, district populations must be as equal as possible. There can only be a 1% spread between the smallest and largest district at most. Other than that, districts may not be gerrymandered. They must be compact and contiguous without taking any individual's residence into consideration. But majority-minority districts may be created in order to prevent the dilution of racial and linguistic groups' voting strength in order to comply with the Voting Rights Act. So keep that in mind. district boundaries must also honor existing district boundaries, natural boundaries, communities of interest in neighborhoods, to the extent that doing so doesn't result in uneven population, dissolution of voting power of racial linguistic groups, or otherwise give an electoral advantage to one group over another. And hopefully now we have some time for questions. I actually didn't keep track of time, so Elsa, you might want to check in on the time there. Oh, one last slide at the back. This is more for your reference. The very last slide is just an appendix that goes into more detail for the legal requirements at the federal law, state law, and local law. I'm not going to go into those here. It would take forever. But if you're curious about what statute says what, you can turn to that tile on your own time. So questions? Okay. Oh, Commissioner Nichols.
So which of these takes precedent?
If you're talking, it depends. So if you're talking about, for example, if we're talking about equal protection, it gets more and more specific. So at the federal level, like I said before, districts must be substantially equal. State law takes precedence over that, as state law says that it must be nearly equal in population as possible. And then the city charter goes even further and says that it must shall not exceed the largest district shall not exceed the population of the smallest by no more than 1%. So in that sense, it just gets narrower and narrower and narrower.
But where they conflict?
Where they conflict, federal law preempts state and local law. State law preempts local law. So we can work backwards. There's local law. If they conflict, state law preempts local law, and federal law preempts both state and local law.
Okay. I just wanted to share with the commission that I have some experience with this. The district that I ran in for the county council, District 8, went all the way from the north, which was Alki Point, to the Pierce County line, and was absolutely written to elect a Democrat. The incumbent did not expect another Democrat to run, but he also had very conveniently left me in the blue just west of the West Seattle district. So we literally had to move in order for me to run. It was just awful. And it took two rounds of districting to change this to something that was contiguous and compact and did not simply run amok across communities of interest. So it is important. It can happen here. And I know that this commission is going to make sure it doesn't happen on our watch, but it has in the past. So.
Any other questions? I'm also happy to follow up if you end up taking a look at these slides on a little bit later on or in your own time, and you have some questions that come up at a later point. Feel free to email me, or we can always also discuss it in an open meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation.
Sorry, I have a super quick one, and I didn't mean to save it until the last moment. And it may be just a question for another time. I'm really curious on if there's any existing law or potentially guidance on how low-income communities interact with the redistricting process. Although they are not called out in the Voting Rights Act and other state or local level policies that I'm aware of, is there precedent for people taking into account, packing, splitting of lower income communities in these discussions that you're aware of?
Well, I can go and take a look. I wasn't researching in that direction, but I can go and take a look. But I will call out, as you mentioned, the Voting Rights Act doesn't consider that class in its protection. And then I'd also call attention to the otherwise the city's ban on other forms of gerrymandering. So affirmative gerrymandering based off of income status, even if it's to benefit low-income groups, would run up against the Seattle a proscription on gerrymandering. I am happy to take a look at if there's any case law on that point. I'd like to, it might be that other jurisdictions have looked to that. On the other hand, other jurisdictions might have other rules than Seattle's rules saying no, districts may not be gerrymandered.
Great, thank you.
I have a question for Ariel, if it's okay. It occurred to me that at one point, and I don't know if there is a time where the maps are actually reviewed by, a lawyer before they get filed to make sure that they're in compliance with all of this. Is that, I don't think we've discussed that step.
I don't think we have either. I don't think it's mandated. It might be what you request. I will say that if that is the case, we could also talk about seeing if there's which lawyer should take a look at the map. There are lawyers that specialize in redistricting, and it might be something that you would appreciate having an attorney who specializes in map redistricting. So we can certainly discuss it. Okay, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And that was a great presentation. All right, so next on the agenda is our GIS update. And so I think, also, were we going to go directly to Dennis for that?
Yes, this is getting more and more exciting. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Elsa and other staff. That was a very interesting presentation. And this is a good one to come on the heels of it. So let me get this going in full screen. Can you see my screen okay? Great. Okay, so just an update on where we're at and some of the information that you've requested from us as of today. First up on my list was looking at options to support public submittal of districting proposals. You, the commissioners, had asked me to look into that, which I did, and I've come up with 3 ways that you could proceed. I've also discussed this with the City of Seattle GIS to a small degree without getting many specifics, but understanding some of the factors at play there. So just to remember, or just a few explanatory terms, citizen participation website would be a site that allows members of the public to create and submit their own districting proposals. An example of this was seen on the Washington State Redistricting Commission website. I submitted one myself as a private citizen through that. We've heard anecdotally from some that they found that a difficult or confusing process. I myself thought it could be a better process, but was able to figure it out and submit some of my own thoughts to the Washington State Commission. The King County Commission that I worked for did not include this, did not provide that capability on its own website. And that was a conscious decision on their part. In the RFP for this process, for this commission, it was not requested that we create such a website. However, you, the commissioners, have requested that I look into it to see what would be entailed. I see the city attorney has her hand raised.
Sorry about that. It's an error.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, so first option would be that the GIS Center, the King County GIS Center, implements a citizen participation website. We have options within that. We could hire Esri, the software vendor of ArcGIS, to create a cloud site that they would host. We could also contract with them for the extra software necessary to deploy such a site locally on our own King County ArcGIS enterprise that would be linked from the city's from the Seattle Commission's website. The cost for this is not huge, but it's not insignificant either. We're estimating that we would need 64 additional hours to implement such a thing for our staff part of it. We would also need to purchase a module of the Esri software that would enable this capability at the cost of $4,500. So there is a cost. It's not huge, but it's not insignificant either. And also there would be time to implement this, and the best I can come up with, given my staff load and also working with other folks that report to others within KCIT, is that we could get this done by the middle part of March, more likely the end of March. So that's option one. Option two, the City of Seattle GIS could implement a site substantially the same as the one I was just discussing. KCGIS would be coordinating and supporting their efforts, advising them, pointing them in the right direction. I would not include a change order for that if that was the choice of the commission, as far as the GIS, the KCGIS support time. In talking with Stephen Beimborn at Seattle GIS and some of his staff, we were unable to get into a discussion on what level of effort it would take and what other costs that might accrue to Seattle GIS. So I'm sorry I cannot get that information to you at this time. If you do choose this option, we will certainly nail that down. Similarly, for the schedule, we would need to work with Seattle GIS to figure out what would work for their staff resources and capabilities. A third option, which is presented here for your consideration, is that this commission could, via its website and other means, refer the public to third-party open source redistricting sites with instructions. Under this scenario, we would craft a set of detailed instructions that could be posted on on this Redistricting Commission's website for creating and downloading and submitting proposals, public-driven proposals, via some third-party open source sites such as Dave's Redistricting and Representable. Those are two that we're aware of. I believe there are others, but those are probably the two that we're most familiar with in this area. In particular, Dave's Redistricting is a site that many have heard of, and I believe Dave presented to this commission prior to the hiring of the GIS consultant. At least I believe that's what Elsa told me. And it may be possible to have Dave himself help with this process. There would not be a cost associated with this. The labor we would incur to create the detailed instructions is not something that I would need to submit a change order to you for. And this also could be deployed fairly quickly. We can get to work on it right away. We can get instructions posted up by the February 15th meeting of this commission, possibly sooner. So those are three options, and I will continue with my presentation for now, but you may want to come back to these three options later in this meeting or at a future meeting. In addition to the site for public consumption, as discussed in the RFP and in our response to the RFP, we are underway on building a site for you all, for the commissioners, a secure site for your own purposes, to be able to conduct research, to be able to work with staff to ask and get answers to questions about demographics in certain areas, census blocks, different combinations. It also will be including Seattle-specific GIS layers, including neighborhood and other GIS layers. We are currently under development on this. I do plan to present it to you. I was actually hoping to give you a sneak preview today. I apologize. The staff member who's working on that for me is teaching a class today and tomorrow. So I wasn't unable to do that, but coming very soon. In fact, I'll come back to this in just a moment, but we may be able to do a demo for you within a week or so. And here is that schedule that I mentioned. This is a schedule that Elsa suggested for some training and mentoring sessions for all of you. We could conduct these in a couple different ways. In one-on-one sessions, we can create custom meetings and interact with you. We also have a set of meetings that are, I guess, tentatively on your schedule that Elsa has laid out here, where we could present to the group of you in a public meeting. And these dates, again, were suggested by Elsa as dates that we could get underway in helping you get familiar with the ArcGIS Online website and how to interact with it, how to ask your questions of it, and so forth. So again, I won't ask you to take any action on that right now, but did want to post those up here for you to take a look. You'll note it's the 1st, 8th, and the 22nd. I believe the 15th, well, I know the 15th, we're aiming to give a major presentation to you on the 4 consultant-created draft plans. So we're not including that date for a possible training or mentoring session. I see Commissioner Nichols, you have your hand up.
How constrained are you in terms of individual training? Are these the only times that are available?
No, they're not. In fact, when we're talking about a custom session, the possibilities are very broad. Those would be, again, one-on-one sessions, not because they wouldn't be open public meetings that are announced. They would be individual sessions for you and one of our GIS staff.
And is that again about an hour and a half is what you'd be aiming for?
I would think that would be a good amount of time. If you only have an hour, that's also just fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and then back to those 4 consultant-generated districting drafts. As a reminder, and as was discussed earlier in this meeting, these are not intended to be your final plans, not even close. In your scope of work, these are intended for initiating discussion only, is the way that I've put it here. That may be phrased slightly differently, but we've discussed this a few times, and yeah, these are just our best effort to help you initiate your discussions. We are underway on generating these and well on track to be able to present them to you at the meeting of this commission on February 15th. Any questions that I can answer for you?
So I had a couple questions. My first question is, so with respect to the 3 options of public participation, is option 3 basically what the King County Redistricting Commission did?
In effect, that's true. It was not, there was never instruction from the commissioners to create the detailed instructions that we're contemplating here. However, many community groups did avail themselves of that opportunity and did submit plans that they had created on those third-party open source sites to the commission. So in effect, that is what happened. The only additional detail that is being contemplated here is that at your direction, we could create very stepwise instructions for you to be able to post onto this commission's website for individuals in the public or groups to be able to follow that process.
And then between options 1 and 2, so I understand that option 1 being you would be the primary entity that would create the public opportunities, and option 2 is that Seattle GIS does it. From the perspective of a member of the public who wanted to submit their maps, is there a way to know, like, is a member of the public, would they notice a difference between option 1 and option 2?
Yeah, I believe they would. Especially under the sub option where we're locally deploying on the King County ArcGIS Enterprise, there is no way for me to, there is no easy way within the amount of labor that we're talking about to disguise that site as a City of Seattle website. It would appear to be and would actually be a King County website. It would be linked from the Seattle Commission's website, but it would take you onto the county's web structure. So, so that would look different from a site that was actually hosted by Seattle GIS.
Okay, and so option 2 then would be an option that from the public perspective might be more integrated within the existing structures that will be part of the commission website?
I would say that that's true. I would also, I don't mean to put words into the colleagues of mine at the City of Seattle in their GIS group, but it was a, they were unable in the short amount of time that we discussed to be able to say how long that would take or even whether they could get to it in a reasonable amount of time. But you're right, Commissioner, in stating that that would have the seamless appearance and be actually contained on the City of Seattle's website.
Thanks. Commissioner Shaw?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a clarifying point. I think I asked this question before, but I want to make sure I got it right. That option 3, if we were linking to a third-party site, just weighing the costs and benefits, I think I recall that you said the only difference would be how the public might submit the maps, but the actual technology behind it, we'd kind of be reinventing the wheel a little bit. Is that accurate?
I think it is. You would be able to do, in options 1 and 2, you would be recreating the same functionality that already exists on these third-party open source websites. So there wouldn't be any difference in the sorts of questions people could ask, the sorts of data that people could take under consideration would all be the same under any of these 3 options.
What does it entail for someone to send the maps? Like is that something that's difficult to do, or?
It's not. The third-party site, the site that we would build on the county enterprise, and the site that the City of Seattle would build would all generate the same materials that would then get forwarded on to the commission.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Elsa, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that conversation that Dennis and I had about for any option that we would include and incorporate an active training to the public on how to do this. So it wouldn't just be instructions. We would incorporate, training our community liaisons, doing it in language, and having sessions where people can come and practice with a GIS expert to spread the wealth of technology, and just to make sure that this is accessible. So in any of the cases we discussed, we could have that option, just for you to know and to consider that.
Okay, well, with that, if there are no more questions, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back over to you and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Dennis, and thanks so much for taking the time to look into that on relatively short notice from us. I really appreciate that. I guess I'd be interested in input from the other commissioners if there is interest in providing direction at this time, maybe taking some time to think about this and providing direction at the next meeting, or what how to consider this and provide direction to our consultant. Commissioner Nichols?
I was just going to say that I find option 3 to be very intriguing. It's simple. We would be providing to the public, not just the folks who are already savvy enough to figure out how to work these open source applications, but to anyone who has a strong interest in our proceeding and the map, to be able to follow those instructions that we would have created and produce a map that we could then consider as we narrow down our choices this summer. So I like option 3, unless there's something I'm missing about 1 and 2 and what they might be able to provide that is of much greater value.
And one other thought would be, we wouldn't necessarily have to make a decision today. One direction that we could provide is we could ask our consultant to start working on the instructions that were proposed as part of option 3, while we take time to consider whether or not to, while we maybe get some additional information to find out whether option 2 actually is an option, and then also would have some additional time to consider whether the investment required for option number 1 would be an appropriate use of funds. Commissioner Shaw?
I wonder if using some of the resources, if we were going to put additional resources to this, would be better spent in providing technical assistance to any member of the community who wanted to work on this and could be challenged by it, rather than creating a whole new website that potentially already exists. I put that out for consideration if folks feel like that's necessary, and we could see, I suppose, if there was interest or need for it.
So it sounds like Commissioner Nichols and Commissioner Shaw are both leaning towards option 3. Commissioner Juarez?
Option 3 seemed on its face the most straightforward. And simple. I think my only concern at this point is, like, we haven't really heard from broad spectrum of the community to say that they want to submit maps. We haven't seen testimony here beyond, I think, just a couple of people. So I'm not too concerned that this is going to be in opposition to anything, because we haven't heard that. So option 3, that was a lot of words to say that. I apologize. Option 3.
So I'll just put a counterpoint in, noting that we are the first redistricting commission for Seattle, and creating I think a process and structure that is as user-friendly as possible. That option number 1, in which it's possible to create and submit maps on the site, does seem to be the most user-friendly and the most straightforward way for members of the public to participate in the process. Maybe rather than making a final decision today, my preference would be for us to direct the consultant to build the instructions that would be required for option 3, and maybe if we as commissioners review those instructions and believe that the process is simple and straightforward enough for members of the public to have the level of participation that we think is going to be valuable, then we can go with that. And in the event that those instructions make it evident that it's more difficult to participate than we would like, and potentially explore option 1 or 2, I would like to still leave those options open. Commissioner Juarez?
I agree. I would love for us to also, in the process of making this decision, decide when we receive the inputs of this process, and whether we deliberate as a group, if this comes to us individually, but what is the moment in which we close that loop with the public to say, we have reviewed this, this is what we saw, or some kind of moment there to say that this has been taken into account beyond just a submission to a website.
And so let me make sure I understand your comments. So you're saying that there would be a period of time during which we would accept maps from the public, or are you talking about input with regard to option 1, 2, or 3?
No, I'm saying beyond this process, I think it's important that we take as a commission a moment that is public in a meeting to say we have reviewed what was submitted, and communicate when and what time frame the commissioners will be reviewing the submitted stuff from that moment, right? It's a separate process, just so that I think in other processes, it has not been clear when commissioners were actively reviewing submissions. It was just kind of assumed that it was submitted, somebody reviewed it at some point. I think it's important for us, as we're modeling good, responsive public service, to say, this is the moment when these are going to start to be reviewed. This is when we will come back with some kind of response.
And again, just to clarify, so you're suggesting when members of the public submit maps, you want us to be clear on when we're reviewing those maps, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Commissioner Nichols?
Just an observation, Mr. Chair. Your counterpoint, I think, is well taken. I think we should look at this thing and the instructions and figure out if at least some of us can make our way through it. But I think the assumption is that whatever the GIS people come up with is going to be simpler for the public to use. And I think that's a bit of a jump. At least in my interaction with GIS people, sometimes it's more difficult because they know this stuff and make some assumption along the way that you have some basis of knowledge that they're speaking to. So I think we should look at it, make sure that it is functional for people, but I wouldn't take the second step and assume that what we came up with would be easier.
Commissioner Shaw?
I was going to say something similar to that, but on the point of instructions, we should try to make sure the instructions are as user-friendly as possible. And, you know, we have a little experience with this, of taking a very long document that got condensed into a few paragraphs. So I'm hopeful that we, you know, if we can't understand it, then, you know, we're going to have to work to make sure that it's understandable. But what I was understanding was that the usability of the site that King County or potentially the city of Seattle might create, it wouldn't necessarily be too much different than what exists out there. So then I think it depends on the instructions and how easily one could get from the city of Seattle's, from our website, to direct, you know, link to Dave's Redistricting or whatever other websites, and then have instructions and make that a smooth process if we're doing it.
So,
but I agree with what you're saying of making sure it's user-friendly and setting precedent.
Can I attempt to summarize it to see if we have a consensus, and if the consensus is sufficient to give our consultant direction. So I think the consensus is that we're asking our consultant to create the instructions that are part of option number 3. We're leaving the possibilities of option number 1 or 2 open, and directing the consultant to consider or to continue maybe exploring what option 2 would entail, given that we the Seattle GIS wasn't able to provide much information for us to really analyze that option, but basically moving forward with option 3, but leaving the possibilities of option 1 or 2 open. Is that an accurate summary of the consensus? And Mr. Higgins, is that sufficient direction for you?
It is. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and definitely taking notes here, and we can get started on those instructions right away. I can also get back in touch with Stephen Beimborn at City of Seattle and ask him to do a little bit more work to scope what would entail an implementation for him, and then we'll be ready for your next meeting.
Great, thank you. That's terrific. If there isn't anything else on that agenda item, I think the next item on the, Elsa?
I just want to make sure that we talked on the scheduling for that training for the next meetings, just to make sure that we are clear on what to expect for the next 2 or 3 meetings in February.
And so that was trainings on February 1st. Well, so yeah, so what's the proposal?
Yeah, so I believe Dennis outlined there to have the actual training on the tool side that King County is proposing to do it on the, we can do one for everyone on the 1st, which is already scheduled for everybody. And then we could do, we were not going to have a meeting on the 8th because I believe some of you had issues for those dates. So we had skipped that meeting. That was, we sent this invitations way before. And then we moved it to the 3rd instead. So Logan had sent an invitation for the Thursday. This meeting doesn't have to stay as a standing meeting. We can use that space for those who RSVP'd already to do that extended or custom meeting with Dennis on the 3rd. And what I'm trying to avoid is just to accomplish is to get as many trainings before the 15th, when Dennis is going to be doing his big presentation on the first drafts. And so if it works, we'll have that first training with everybody on the 1st, which is next Tuesday. And then we'll have, for those who RSVP'd for the 3rd, which is the Thursday, already in your calendars, we can use that space with Dennis for you or his team to do the training, extended training. For those of you who can, and if it's like only one-on-one or 2 or whoever, we have the 3rd, and the next one will be the 8th for those who could do it. And that way I'm trying to avoid having to go into your calendar to see what other dates work.
Is there anyone who has conflicts with the 1st, the 3rd, or the 8th? Commissioner Nichols?
I think my preference would be that we not meet twice a week. That would be a bad precedent, I think.
Maybe it would be useful to get some input from Mr. Higgins on, or actually, and maybe Elsa as well. So the meeting on February 3rd, is that February 1st, are we thinking about taking a full, we'd have approval of the agenda and minutes, but like taking an hour or a very significant chunk of that meeting to be just the GIS training.
It will be just the GIS training.
And then, so Mr. Higgins, given your experience with the King County Redistricting Commission, how much training did you find was valuable for them? Like how much material do you have to cover? Do you have like 5 hours of material to cover, or like 2 hours? Like what's the quantity of training that you're expecting?
An hour and a half is more than enough. In fact, I would be surprised if we went the full 90 minutes. The site that is being built for you, the commissioners, is the content, we're talking, 6 or so map layers that you'll be able to interact with, explaining the functionality. I don't anticipate being longer than an hour.
And and then also it might be useful to clarify. So are we expecting that the meeting on the February 1st is going to be a training, but it's going to be public, so the members of the public will be able to follow along with our training? Is that right, Elsa?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
So maybe Mr. Higgins, would this make sense if we keep our scheduled meeting on Tuesday, February 1st, and dedicate that to training, and then maybe once that training has been completed, then individual commissioners can reach out to you between the 1st and the 15th for additional one-on-one or additional trainings as needed. Elsa, do you think, I guess Mr. Higgins, do you think that would be sufficient?
I do, and I anticipate, we have in the scope of work included, I can't remember the exact count, but many opportunities for commissioners to interact with us on a one-on-one basis after that. So yes, I think that's a very reasonable and would be a very productive way to look at it and proceed.
So Elsa, does that make sense based on your understanding of what we're trying to accomplish?
Yep.
All
So
right.
no meeting on the 3rd for sure.
Yeah, no public meeting on the 3rd. So we'd have a public meeting on the 1st, and then commissioners would be expected to reach out individually with Mr. Higgins for additional trainings between the 1st and the 15th.
If they so desire, yes.
Right. All right. Is there anything else that we need to cover with respect to schedule, Elsa?
Thank you
All
for
right.
that flexibility, Chair and Dennis. I appreciate it. I think we all do. So thank you.
Yeah. So I think the next item on the agenda is selection of the new chair. So I nominate Commissioner Shaw to serve as the next chair of the Seattle Redistricting Commission.
Second.
Commissioner Shaw, do you have a statement?
I agree to be the next chair. I assume that in our desire to share the responsibility equitably and also give everybody a chance to lead this group, that we're hoping that everybody will have a chance to chair. So we have another 10 months or so. So I would be chair for 2.5 months. Is that accurate?
Sounds about right.
So I agree to that and, look forward to it. Thank you.
All right. Those in favor of Commissioner Shaw serving as the next chair, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. Any abstentions?
I'll abstain from voting for myself.
All right. Commissioner Shaw, the gavel is yours.
Thank you.
Yay, congratulations. Looking forward to it. You'll hear from me then. You're off the hook.
Oh yeah,
Mr.
when does this take effect?
Right now.
Right now. Okay. All right. Thank you, Commissioner O'Sullivan, for your service and for taking the lead. Appreciated. Job well done.
We open to a motion to adjourn? I think we're done. So moved.
Second.
See you on February 1st.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Be safe.